Okay, Matt, they gave me the thumbs up.
Yay thumbs.
Yay thumbs says we're live once again doing the show with an empty. I'm actually looking around expecting people to be sitting
Our
here.
studio audience is down this evening.
Yeah, just one back there, and we'll take all of our cues from Josh. Josh is back there in the booth, making sure that everything is working, and we appreciate him coming in tonight.
Very much so.
And helping us out. Tonight we're going to be talking about the book of Esther. I think it's one of the most unique books of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament. And so we're going to delve into that tonight. And in fact, we'll keep talking about it for at least the next several weeks as we kind of decide, how long we're going to be without classes on Wednesday night. And hopefully we will be able to be together soon.
That's so, but nobody knows at this point except the Lord. So.
That's right. That's right. Okay, Matt, before we get into the topic, though, there was a lot going on in the world today. In fact, you texted me about it, and I was like, I just found out like 30 minutes ago. I've been working.
Yes. Well, some of us spend our days driving around. Others of us spend our days in front of internet-capable computers.
Yeah.
That has a lot to do with how much of the news you take in.
Yeah.
And
so give us a word or two before we start out about the things that happened today.
Definitely strange events for our country. And I think that a lot of people right now are feeling very fearful and uncertain about what the future may hold for any number of reasons. Yep. And it is always sad to see political strife boiling over like this. Mm-hmm. But even in this, I think it's important for us to remember where we need to locate our understanding as Christians.
And where is that? Where do we need to locate our understanding?
I think, first of all, we need to remember just how spiritually dangerous politics can be. I think you said to me this afternoon that even though politics can't save souls, it can certainly cost souls.
It sure can.
And just like anything else, it is completely possible to be a godly Christian and be politically involved and active in a godly way.
Right.
But it's also possible to do that and not be godly.
Sure is.
And that's the danger that we have to watch out for.
That's right. And so let's kind of take this and segue to the book of Esther. Because in fact, it is a book about political intrigue, isn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of the great irony here, because you and we've been talking about this class about Esther for months. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was the thing you wanted to teach.
I wanted to teach this. As soon as the elders we were in a meeting, they're like, okay, what classes we're going to have? I don't know.
Yeah,
sorry guys. There. What classes are we going to have this next quarter?
You can't even do it.
I can't. And he's like, Clay, what do you want to teach? Esther?
And then
Clay's down for Esther.
You?
Yeah, they looked at me like, wow. Like, it is the most fantastic book of the Old Testament.
So anyway,
I do.
You have been on Esther.
I have been on it. I've been on an Esther kick for a while. And really my goal was to have a low estrogen Esther class because I wanted guys to come. And so now we're having to do it this way.
It is a real low estrogen class.
Yeah, it's just three guys in here.
Except for virtual estrogen.
But as we've talked about before, our number one demographic is women 55 and older.
So ladies, we appreciate you.
That's right.
We're not going to go asking your age to check and see if you belong, but whatever age you are, we appreciate
That's right. But here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to do fairy tale Esther. Because of all the books in the Bible, we could come to this book and take out the names. Instead of make it in Susa, we can make it New York, Washington, D.C. And you basically have a best-selling political intrigue book, don't you?
Absolutely. And so you have this book that is chronicling all this political maneuvering and machination, which has a very modern ring to it.
Yeah.
But even though, and we'll talk about that unusual attribute in a little bit, I think.
Yep.
Even though he does not appear front and center, it is still true that the message of the book is that God is in control.
That's right.
And in times like this, that's deeply reassuring for all of us, I think.
That's right. God was in control then with the government. God is still in control today. No matter how crazy it may look and may seem, he is still there maneuvering things the way to accomplish his plan, right?
Absolutely. And what makes that interesting is a lot of the time when we think of God being in control of the rise and fall of nations, we think about God doing these spectacular things.
Yeah.
You know, he sends the 10 plagues to deliver Israel from bondage.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like that going on in Esther at all.
Not at all. In fact, we'll point out in just a minute, one of the pivotal point in the book, none of God's people are there. None of the main characters are there. It's just God working in a really small way. And we'll point that out in just a minute. I want to hear from y'all, though. What is it about the book of Esther? Because I know there's a lot of people that love the book of Esther. And there's some people who are like, not really. What is it that you like about the book of Esther or maybe don't like? And you can, I'll be monitoring Facebook. I think Josh might be monitoring the YouTube chat. And as always, you can text me if y'all still got my number from when we were doing this with a live audience. You can do that, or I don't mind if Josh puts it up there. You can do that. I get phone calls and texts all the time. It's because I put my number out there too much.
Well,
And
it's the price of fame.
That's no, not fame. So what is it? What is it about the book of Esther that you like or don't like? Or maybe what is it that you really want to learn about the book of Esther? And we'll make sure we work that in. Okay, first of all, Matt, let's put the book of Esther in its chronological context. So give me its biblical context. Where do we need to put the book of Esther? Because the books are not arranged in a chronological order, per se. So tell me, where does it belong in a chronological fashion?
I'd say definitely post-exilic.
Okay, so post-exile, or it's in that exile, post-exile time frame. So who else is in that? What other books?
Other biblical main characters in that time, you've got Ezra, you've got Nehemiah, you've got Daniel, you've got Ezekiel. Okay. This is happening about that time, even though what we see in Esther is real different from what you see in any of those other books.
That's right. So within its biblical context, it's Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Ezekiel the prophet, Haggai is around, but in that time frame. But he's off in Jerusalem. He's not in the captivity area. So we have it there. If I recall correctly, and I should have looked this up, Esther is before Nehemiah. Is that correct?
Search me.
I think Esther comes chronologically before Nehemiah.
My sense is that that's the case.
I think that is the case, and before the latter chapters of Ezra. So that gives you that biblical chronological time frame. We're there in post-exile, exilic, Jewish diaspora, if you want to say it that way.
This is in the time of the third king of the Persian Empire. That when Cyrus comes in and conquers Babylon, you got Cyrus, you got his son Darius, and then you have the king in Esther.
That's right. And usually, though, if you look him up, he will probably find him by what name?
Xerxes.
Xerxes, Xerxes the first. I've seen it. Fashioned that way. Doug Arney's weighed in and says he loves how Mordecai puts it on Esther. Who knows if this is why you're here? Yes, he really turns it on when we get there in chapter 4. And we'll have something to say about that, at least from a textual standpoint, when we get there. Okay, so that's a biblical context. Give me the historical context. You kind of already told us Xerxes the first.
And at this point in time, Persia is really the boss dog of all the kingdoms. They're the ones who are on top. And they're going to stay on top for another 200 years until the Macedonians come along and Alexander comes along and conquers them.
Which Daniel talks about all that in his prophecy. In fact, the first verse of Esther, if you're watching, you want to go ahead and turn to the book of Esther, the first verse tells us how massive the empire is. Ahasuerus, as he's called in the book of Esther, reigns from a territory that went from India all the way to Ethiopia. And that's huge. That is huge.
Yes. And if you look at, I think it was actually the funeral monument for Xerxes that talked about him occupying like the territory around the Indus River.
Right.
I guess we still know where his necropolis was. It's still there.
That's right.
It's in modern day Iran.
So as the book opens, he's giving a banquet to show off all of his glory. And we have that scene where Vashti refuses to come in. And then there's an interlude between the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. Most scholars say that's when he leads the army of the Persians to Greece. And how did that go out for him?
Well, interestingly.
Yes. There's two big battles that,
Yes.
at least in the Western culture, we know about.
Yes.
What's the first one?
The first one is Thermopylae.
Yeah, the Battle of Thermopylae. You probably saw the documentary. I think it was called 300.
Yes, very, very historically faithful and accurate.
Josh is laughing. Did you see it? I've never seen it.
I have not seen it either, but I can well imagine.
Yeah, everybody's turning us off. I gotta go see this documentary.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah, the Battle of Thermopylae, where the 300 Spartans hold off the Persians until they're betrayed, and just one of the great battles of Western civilization. But then there's the other one, and it's actually one of the. I actually did look up the top 10 battles that saved Western culture. And
that one would be on the list.
It's on the top 10 list. It's not number one. Number one, let's see, is like from 1559 when the Sultan is coming through Czechoslovakia and he's repelled back there. But what battle is it?
The other Battle of Salamis.
Yeah, the Battle of Salamis.
Battle.
Yeah, it's a naval battle, one of the greatest naval battles of ancient history. Xerxes has assembled the greatest fleet. Probably one of the greatest fleets up until World War II that had ever been assembled. And it's just a disaster. And he is so angry, Matt. What does he do after he is defeated at this battle?
Well, there's what he does after he's defeated is he gives up and goes home. But along with that, one of the things that the Persians had done was imagine in your mind that sort of little water strait between the Balkans on the one hand and modern-day Turkey on the other. It's called the Hellespont.
Yes.
And to supply their army, the Persians had built a bridge across that. And a big storm came through and wrecked their boat bridge.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like 25 miles across or something like that. So this is a substantial undertaking. And so Xerxes was so angry that what he did was he commanded his servants, and they got a whip, and they went up to the water of this strait of water,
yes.
and they flogged it 300 times.
Yes, he flogged the water.
Yeah, they beat
punished the water.
And then they took some like chains and shackles and fetters, and they tossed them into the Hellespont like they were binding it.
Like they were binding the waters.
Yeah, so this is the kind of guy that Xerxes is.
Yeah, I characterized him in the promo as dim-witted and self-centered.
Yes.
And if you read through Esther and you think this is the most powerful man in the world,
yes,
he's an idiot.
Yes, very much so. The way that I described it to you before we began was that this is like you took Bubba the redneck and you put Bubba on the throne.
Right.
And he's just a beer drinking, good for nothing, and yet suddenly he's in charge of this empire.
That's right.
And that's who Xerxes was.
All right, let me turn to a couple of comments real quick. Carolyn says one of her favorite quotes from the book of Esther is, "Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this." Rachel says, Esther is interesting, but sometimes overused in ladies' studies, yet often not studied in depth. It is, and in fact, I'm so glad she brought that up. Just later, when we're done, go to Amazon and just put in Esther Bible Studies and just look at the titles.
Really?
One of them will be Esther, It's Hard to Be a Woman. Okay.
Some days sorry.
Go ahead, keep saying.
No, good.
Another one, I saw this one. It said, The Esther Anointing, How to Pray More Powerfully.
Well,
okay, Esther's never praying in the Bible.
I mean, it's kind of like turning to Judas for an example of repentance.
Yeah, all right. And another one was, and actually I have this one, Esther, How to Build Godly Character. I mean, I just love scratching my head sometimes like, you've got to be kidding me.
I mean, you're taking a whole lot of not very much, and you're spinning that out into a whole lesson book.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to it in just a minute. These are some of the least righteous people, I hate to say in the Bible, but They're not righteous at all.
These are some of the least righteous good guys.
Okay, I like that. Some of the least righteous good guys. And they're really complicated people.
That they are. And if they do anything that looks conventionally godly,
Yeah.
The writer of Esther just doesn't mention it.
Yeah, and we can explore that here in just a minute. Okay, do you want to give a quick word about the historicity of Esther?
Well, this is one that if you're watching some show on the History Channel, if they still have those, about Esther, you'll see some guy in his tweeds with his pipe, and he'll say, "Oh, this is just a fable. This is a novella."
Right.
And as always,
Define novella.
A novella is just a short novel, but
Okay.
this is a tissue of fiction from beginning to end.
Gotcha.
And what's going on here is the same sort of stuff that always comes up when these so-called experts are studying the Bible, which is the Bible starts off with two strikes against it.
Right.
That unless there is something else that corroborates the historicity of a biblical episode, they say, nope, never happened.
Right.
Even though there's nothing in the book that is miraculous that would attract that kind of scrutiny. That there's
That's
just that there's not really a reason to reject it.
That's out there, and so we just give you that because if you happen to explore this, as Rachel says, we need to explore it and study it more in depth, you're going to find that. You cannot escape that at all when you come to the book of Esther.
And just recognize that there's no really good reason for saying that.
That's right. That's right.
That's
Okay.
just asserted.
All right. So we started out by saying the book of Esther is really unique. Rachel's pointed out that it's kind of handled in a unique way. I mean, it's generally limited to just studies with women, and it's oftentimes presented as some kind of Disney fairy tale.
Yes.
We've got the dim-witted king, the evil royal servant, but the coming-of-age princess with her loyal guardian who has to save everybody.
Yeah, I mean, all we need is a talking pet.
Yeah.
We're there.
That's right, and a catchy song, and we've got a Disney hit. But there's a lot more to this book than just that. I know we've kind of made fun of it just a little bit. Let's tick off some of the things that are unique about this book. Give me the one that's most obvious and usually the first one people go to.
It is one of only two books of the Bible, to my knowledge, in which the name of God is not mentioned. God simply does not appear here. And interestingly, I don't think God is mentioned in Song of Solomon either.
Okay, which again, maybe that's the second most unique book.
Yeah.
You know what? We should do a Song of Solomon study.
We should.
I
We'll
could not keep a straight face.
We'll talk about how it's Christ in the church.
No, no. Yeah, God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. And not only that, Jerusalem's not mentioned. The temple's not mentioned. The law is not mentioned. Prophecy is not mentioned. You look at how Esther fits within its historical context. God's all through Daniel. The temple and prophecy and the law, it's all through Daniel. It's all through Ezra, heavily in Ezra.
Yeah.
It's all through Nehemiah. But it's not mentioned at all in Esther.
It is not. In fact, the only Jewish elements in Esther are, first of all, that there's this people called the Jews.
Yes.
And secondly, I think just Esther's name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which isn't actually Esther.
Which isn't Esther, yeah. What's her Jewish name?
Her Jewish name is Hadassah.
Hadassah. And that's something else that makes this book unique. I'm not sure about Ruth, so maybe is Ruth even a Jewish name?
It'd probably be a Moabite name.
Moabite, yeah. Okay, so the two books we have named after women, we don't even get there.
Via the Hebrew language.
Yeah, the Hebrew name.
Yes, because just like Daniel was named Belteshazzar,
right,
and you have Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah who are named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Right.
So Esther also has Hadassah also has a Persian name, which is Esther.
Yeah, and some people say it maybe means myrtle. Some say star, because Hadassah means myrtle.
Yeah.
It could also be a reference to Ishtar. Is that how you say it? Ishtar, the love goddess.
Yeah.
Of the Persians. Mordecai, her guardian cousin. We'll get in more to the characters in the next study or two.
Yeah.
That's not Marduk. That's a play off the god Marduk.
Yes. He definitely has a non-Jewish name after a pagan god.
Right, and we don't even get a Jewish name for him, if I recall.
We do not.
Okay, so God's not mentioned. None of the things that we expect, such as we see in Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, it's all absent from the book of Esther.
Yes. If this were not part of the canon, you wouldn't encounter it outside the canon and say, oh, this belongs in the Bible.
Well, actually, and that's an interesting point. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, every book of the Old Testament was found there except which one?
Esther.
Except Esther. They didn't have a copy. They had loaned their last copy out before they fled.
They hadn't got it back yet.
Yeah, Esther wasn't there. During the Reformation, Luther
really didn't like Esther.
Really did not like Esther. Said it did not belong at all. Calvin was of the same stripe about that as well. Let's go ahead and talk about the next unique quality of the book of Esther. Because there is this lack of talk about God and the temple and praying and all that stuff, there's actually a whole body of work around the book of Esther called Apocryphal Esther, or sometimes you might see it called Greek Esther. If you've never read Greek Esther, you should read it. It is so different.
In a lot of ways, I think it would be a much more comfortable fit in the Bible than the actual book of Esther.
Right, that's right.
Even though it is several centuries later than Esther.
Yeah, there's a Greek version that was included in the Septuagint. There is a Hebrew version. Now, obviously, I don't read Hebrew, so I've never read the English translation of Hebrew Esther. That's different. Hebrew Apocryphal Esther, I'll say it that way. It is very different. Just give us a couple of things that makes it really different.
For instance, in Apocryphal Esther, you have Esther and Mordecai praying.
A lot. They're praying a lot. One of the things that she prays is she hates being married to this uncircumcised Gentile. And
which would be a really Jewish sort of sentiment.
That's right.
But it's not anything we see in the canonical book of Esther.
That's right. When Mordecai won't bow down to Haman, and Mordecai prays to God in Apocryphal Esther, he says there, I'm not going to do it because I'm only supposed to bow to God. Haman wants me to bow to him like he is a god.
Yes.
In fact, I brought that up one time. I asked the question in a Bible class. We were studying Esther. I said, why won't Mordecai bow down? And somebody raised their hand. They said, well, because Haman wanted to be worshipped like a god. I said, where is that? And they're like, I thought it was in here.
Yeah, nope.
And I said, okay, this is a great segue to this book called Apocryphal Esther. In Apocryphal Esther, Mordecai is presented as a prophet. The first chapter of Apocryphal Esther, which is not chapter 1 in our Esther, Mordecai has a vision, and he sees all kinds of turbulent times ahead for his people. And then at the end, he realizes, oh, that's what that dream was about. So he's not a jerk. He acts like a jerk sometimes in this Esther. And
I think one of the interesting functions that Apocryphal Esther serves is it highlights all of the parts of real Esther that give us the most difficulty.
That's right.
That whoever it was who wrote that didn't change the stuff that they were okay with. Yeah. Instead, that they put in the things that would make it more palatable.
Right. Yeah. More palatable to pious people.
Yes.
And in fact, that's something that I've come across a few years ago. One writer said, when we come to the scriptures, we have a pious bias. We think, with the exception of Jonah, everybody that God uses is pious. And maybe that brings us to the next unique quality about the book of Esther. These people are really less than pious, aren't they?
At least by any conventional standard.
Right. Or at least by the standard of their historical contemporaries.
Well, this would be, in our time, this would somebody who might claim to be a Christian, but doesn't read the Bible, doesn't study, doesn't pray, doesn't go to church, doesn't talk about God. And we probably all know people like that. Mm-hmm. And we think their claims to be Christians are kind of thin.
Right.
And yet that's about what we see from Esther and Mordecai.
Yeah, so take Mordecai for just a moment. And I harped on his name just a few minutes ago, that he bears the name of Marduk, a god. You know, we shouldn't be too hard on him. We have a New Testament character, a very prominent one in the book of Acts, and he's mentioned in 1 Corinthians. No, it was like 1 Corinthians. A very powerful teacher of the gospel, and yet he has a God name.
Apollos.
Yeah. So we shouldn't be too hard on Mordecai.
Your name is your name, and if I remember rightly, Belteshazzar, Daniel's name, was from the god Bel.
Yeah.
And I think even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also had Babylonian-derived names derived from Babylonian gods.
Right. So let's take Mordecai for just a moment. He won't bow down or rise up to show homage to Haman. It was not a sin to show homage to a person. King David received homage all the time. Jews gave homage to people all the time. He just seems like he just doesn't want to do it.
There's certainly no commandment,
right?
Like we see in the New Testament, where you have angels telling people get up.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
That's not really present in the Old Testament.
Yeah. The second thing that makes Mordecai kind of suspicious, at least from a faith standpoint, is he tells Esther not to reveal her identity as a Jew.
That's right. She is supposed to hide it.
So he gets to let it be known to everybody. I'm not going to bow down to Haman because I'm a Jew. Esther, Hadassah, don't tell anybody you're a Jew. I mean, that just runs contrary to Daniel, Esther, Nehemiah. Daniel and his friends are like, no, we're Jews. We're not eating the king's food.
Yeah, and they cause trouble.
Yeah.
Because they are Jewish and they say we can't eat that stuff.
That's right.
And there is no sign that Esther was trying to keep any dietary restrictions at all.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And then you've got the other big thing about Esther. And what do you think she was doing that night with the king?
Well,
did they go to Buckhead's and have a cup of coffee?
Yeah,
go on a date?
If I remember rightly, there's that movie, One Night with the King, that came out about 15 years ago. And I think in the movie, she goes in and she reads to Ahasuerus. I don't think in real life she was reading.
Yeah, I mean, basically she is a sex slave.
Yeah.
That's what she is.
Why else would she be invited to the king's chambers at sunset and leave in the morning?
And go to the harem.
Yes.
Yeah. So Esther is a sex slave.
Yeah.
Now, she is elevated.
Yeah, and she doesn't have a whole lot of choice throughout all of this.
She doesn't. And that's something that we see with Esther develop through the story. She's very passive at the beginning, very assertive at the end. But this isn't the place we expect to see a Jew affecting great change, particularly when you compare her to her contemporaries, her historical contemporaries. Yes. Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah. And if you want to go even bigger in a biblical context, you go all the way back to Joseph, who refuses to do this kind of stuff when he is in a place of royalty. So those are complicated aspects of the two main Jewish characters.
And you have characters like Nehemiah, who takes a great risk as the cupbearer to the king, to say, I need to go home and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Yeah. You see Daniel, who takes a risk in continuing to pray to God. Yeah. And you just don't see the same kind of, I'm going to lay it on the line for my faith, from Esther or Mordecai.
And that's just that's one of the great things that makes this book unique. And we'll look at as we go along, why do we have it in the canon? Why do we have it in Scripture? Okay, just real quick, just a few other things that make this book unique. Outside of the poetry books, I think this one book has the highest literary structure of all the other books of the Old Testament, or maybe even of all the Bible.
Yeah, it's pretty stylized. I think you said that it was written in reverse chiastic form. Yeah,
it's written in reverse chiastic form. And so basically, if you're not familiar with that, the story stair steps down to a point, and then it reverses back. And the point is the central focus of the story. And in fact, in Esther, the central point and the central focus of the story is chapter 6. And we can just look at it real quick. Even though God's not mentioned in this story, none of the main characters, none of our Jewish heroes are even in chapter 6.
Right.
Ahasuerus needs to go to sleep, but according to verse 1, he could not sleep. And so he gave orders to bring the book of memorial deeds and the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about, how would you say it?
Big Sam?
Yeah. What a name. And Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, they were going to assassinate the king. Mordecai says, reveals the plot. And so the king says, well, how have we rewarded him? How have we honored him? Esther's not there. Mordecai's not there. The king just so happened could not sleep.
Yes.
It's like the providential hand of God is working in this central moment of the story.
Yes. If the king has a good night's sleep, then probably nothing else in the rest of the book happens, the Jews are exterminated.
That's right. And so this is the central focus, and you see that in that reverse chiastic format. And again, we've said God's not mentioned, but God's hidden hand is here.
Yes.
And we really see it
This
right
is
there.
not a miraculous book. This is a providential book.
That's right.
And in some ways, that makes it more comforting to us today, that God accomplishes his will through very subtle means as well.
That's right. Yeah. In this particular instance, the king could not sleep. We've got, we've got a lot of irony in this book. It didn't rain on anybody's wedding day.
Yes. Although,
drum roll.
Yes. Although many of those things are not actually ironic in the song.
Yeah.
So, but these are ironic.
For all you children of the 90s who got that, and for those of you who are too old.
There's a song.
That was funny to us.
1995.
Yeah. Okay.
Josh is smirking.
Yeah, that's right.
So we hit at least a portion.
We
of our
got
audience
somebody.
there.
Yeah, there's a lot of irony here. One aspect of the irony is the rise and fall in Haman.
Yeah.
So Mordecai won't rise up. He won't fall down.
Yeah.
He casts Purim to decide when to exterminate the Jews. It falls. He raises up the gallows. He's raised up to high position, but then loses his high position when he falls down before a Jewish woman and winds up getting hanged on impaled on his own gallows. We'll talk about that when we get to it later. So you see the rise and fall of Haman. There's irony in the two queens. Why is Vashti deposed? And I'm assuming everybody knows the story of Esther.
Spoilers.
We'll get into the text later, but Vashti is deposed. Why?
Because she refuses to appear when commanded.
That's right. And Queen Esther is exalted as the heroine because she
appears when not invited.
That's right. So we get that reversal and that irony there. In this book, it's just full of that stuff, just over and over and over again. One last thing that I think that we need to point out is God's not mentioned, the law of Moses is not mentioned, the temple in Jerusalem's not mentioned. Nobody seems to be devoted to God.
No.
But we are going to be devoted to Purim.
Yes.
And in fact, that's at the end of the book, we find that a celebration and a holiday has been inaugurated so that people will remember this. And I'm just going to go to Esther chapter 9. Look at, we'll start at verse 26. Therefore, they called these days Purim after the term Pur, or Pur. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter that Mordecai had sent, and what they had faced in the matter, and of what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written, and at the time appointed every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation and in every clan, every province and city, and that these days of Purim would never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among their descendants. it seems like we're not dedicated to God. The Jews are not dedicated to God. And yet we have this man-made celebration that we are going to devote ourselves to.
Yeah, they just tossed this one in the religious calendar, and there it is.
That's right. I'm looking for a note. I know I wrote it down. Yeah, there it is. One of the historical contemporaries, Nehemiah, as we've pointed out before, says something in his prayer in chapter 1. This is in Nehemiah chapter 1. Let's see. The prayer begins at verse 5. Look at verse 7. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you have commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though your outcasts are at the uttermost parts of heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen. He seems to indicate that the Jews of his day were not keeping the commandments. And Nehemiah is chronologically after Esther. I get that. That might be one reason why we don't see Esther and Mordecai praying, and we don't see them talking about the law or Jerusalem. Is because perhaps that's just not at the forefront of their minds.
And you might look at that and say, oh, this is like Daniel says when he's talking about all the stuff that led them to be carried to captivity.
Right.
But if you look at up at verse 6, Nehemiah makes clear that this is to the present day. Both
That's right.
I and my father's family have sinned.
That's right. And Nehemiah is not in Jerusalem at the beginning of the book.
No, he
did
Susa.
not go back. He's in Susa, same place Esther was. He didn't go back the way he was supposed to at first.
Yeah.
He has a change of heart, obviously. But the people were supposed to return, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And perhaps they're not returning because their Jewish culture, their devotion to God is not as true and pure as it should be.
A little later, you have the Hellenistic Jews.
Right. Yeah.
And it might be that in the same way, you have people like Esther and Mordecai who are assimilating as Persians.
That's right. Yeah. And that brings something up that's kind of ironic. We're not devoted to God, at least in our language, as the book is written, but we are devoted to this holiday, which today in Judaism is kind of like a Mardi Gras, and it's kind of the way it's celebrated.
Yeah. And so it's much more important to be part of the Jewish people than it is to be part of God's people.
That's right.
That it matters that we're spared because we're Jewish, not because we're going to make a big deal out of how God spared us.
Okay. So there's a lot of unique qualities, a lot of places to raise our eyebrows and say, wow, I can't believe this book is here. But why is this book in the Bible? I think one of the reasons is because it's a continuation of biblical theme and narrative. And I think the place you see that is in the genealogical relationship of Mordecai and Haman. So let's check that out. Go with me to chapter 2. Matt, read verse 5 for us. This is our introduction to Mordecai.
Oh, I'm in Nehemiah 2. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
But let me get quickly to Esther 2. New Bible, so pages are sticky.
I have a marker at Esther C, so my new Bible pages don't stick.
I have 3 markers, but none of them are in Esther.
Oh.
Anyway, Esther 2 and verse 5.
5, yeah.
In the fortress of Susa, there was a Jewish man named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite.
Okay, now that's our introduction to Mordecai. Go over to chapter 3, probably the same opening. Look at verse 1, and this is our introduction to Haman.
After all this took place, King Ahasuerus honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite.
Okay.
Agagite.
Yeah.
Agagagagagag.
What? Now. Josh is back there laughing. And
I'm glad somebody thinks we're funny besides us.
That's right. Anyway, moving on. From a biblical standpoint, what is the significance of these two guys who will be enemies in the story of Esther? What's the significance of them being introduced to us this way?
In both cases, you have a genealogical tie-in back to 1 Samuel.
Okay, 1 Samuel chapter 15.
Yep.
Yep.
Which is actually a place that we're a lot more familiar with in Bible class.
That's right.
This is the story of Saul failing to obey God's commandments.
Now, Saul is the son of Kish.
Yes.
Okay. And so that gives us
He
the
is of the
tie-in
tribe
with
of Benjamin.
That's right. Gives us the tie-in with Mordecai. Now, is he a direct descendant of Saul? We don't know. But we get enough to say, oh, okay, I can see the connection.
And if you remember, Shimei, who cursed David, was also a Benjamite.
That's right.
So, anyway, in 1 Samuel 15, you have Saul, who has the connection that we've just detailed.
Yep.
And he is told to fight against the Amalekites, who, according to verse 8 of 1 Samuel 15, are ruled by a dude named Agag.
That's right. And so Haman is presented as a descendant of this king.
Yes.
And even though, again, God's not mentioned, the law's not mentioned, Jewish history's not mentioned.
Here it seems like something is repeating itself.
That's right. We get this tidbit of information that something deeper is going on here.
Maybe these guys aren't going to like each other.
That's right. And even going beyond that, this is a conflict that has been going on between these two groups, Jews and Amalekites, which Agag was king of. This is a conflict that's been going on ever since the Exodus.
Yep.
And in fact, as according to the law, it's in Deuteronomy chapter 25, I think verses 17 through 19. Yep, 17 through 19, that when you destroy these people, these wicked people, Amalekites, the Agites, if you want to use that term for them, then you'll have rest. And so we don't have to have God mentioned. We don't have to have very pious people. We can see that there is a greater, deeper spiritual conflict going on in this book through the mentioning of these two groups of people coming together as enemies. And in fact, by the end of the book, I mean, this is a spoiler alert, the Jews win.
Yes.
And after they destroy their enemies, lo and behold, they get to have rest, just like was promised in Deuteronomy. Okay. Give us a last word, and then actually give us your last word. I'm going to take the last word tonight with chapter 2.
I will take the second to the last word.
Okay.
I guess hopefully what we are getting from this is that this is a unique book. And as we were talking about it, it struck me that in some ways the closest comparison is the book of Judges, where in the same way you have a lot of people who do not appear to be righteous at all.
Yeah.
And yet somehow God's purpose is advanced through what they do.
That's right.
And so we're going to be seeing the same thing happening here.
That's right. Okay. I told Matt that in light of what we saw in the news today, I'm going to go ahead and explain the end of the book. Like we said in our section on how unique the book is, it is in a reverse chiastic format. So it goes down and it comes back. And when it comes back, it parallels what is directly across from it in the chiasm, except for chapter 10. Chapter 10 stands alone. So I'm just going to go to the end there. And it says, King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land and on the coastal lands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of his high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? And Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers. And he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all people. You know, by the end of the book, we might look at this and say, wow, look how great it is. Second in command. A Jew is second in command, almost like we see in Daniel, certainly in the life of Joseph, and parallels to Nehemiah. And Ezra seems to have been some kind of high official to have the access.
Some kind of respect.
Yeah, some kind of respect. We might look at this and say, okay, all is well. But all's not well. We have a king on the throne who is a dim-witted, self-centered buffoon of a king.
And he's still there.
And he's still there. And he has taxation power to suppress people. Yes, we have a Jew who's second in command, who perhaps have some influence and steer him this way. But who's he a descendant from? Perhaps Saul, or at least in that lineage?
There weren't that many Benjamites.
Yeah. That kingship was deposed. Yeah, we've got a queen of influence who is a Jewish woman. But this isn't how it is supposed to be.
Although, interestingly, Esther is not
mentioned. Yeah, that's right. She's not mentioned in chapter 10. But this isn't how it's supposed to be. There is something greater, and it's coming. We don't have a lot more Jewish writings in the Old Testament to follow the book of Esther, chronologically speaking.
Yeah, Malachi is definitely after it.
Yeah. We've got something better coming. Don't put all your hopes in politicians.
It's never been a good idea. It is still not a good idea.
It wasn't a good idea in the days of the Jews with Esther, and it's still not a good idea now. Was disaster averted? Absolutely. But the structural framework that brought about the potential persecution is still there.
Yes.
We can't put all of our hopes and dreams and aspirations in politicians today. The same structural political framework that seems to fail us year after year after year after year is still there.
Well, it boils down to being a human being problem.
Right.
And just like you had corrupt and incompetent governing officials 2,500 years ago, there's no reason why we should expect things to be better now.
That's right. That's right. That's the book. That's our introduction to the book of Esther. Lord willing, next week we'll be back. I'm assuming we'll be back. I'm assuming at least through the next 4, 5, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Don't hold us to that. It might be longer.
Well,
It could be shorter. I don't know. But we'll plan for several lessons here. We'll plan to cover next week, Matt, maybe 3, 4, 5 chapters, and then we'll do a textual study, and then we'll come back and maybe do studies of the individual people.
See what we think of all of these people.
Yeah, just see what we think and what we can learn from each one individually. So that is the plan. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you very much. If you enjoyed this, if this helped you, would you please hit that share button and let people know what you are watching tonight? Maybe they can glean something from this as well.
Yep. We
We are meeting in person on Sunday mornings at 10:15 and Sunday nights at 5 o'clock.
That's right.
We are using the 5 o'clock assembly. If you like a little bit smaller crowd, there's a little bit more room to spread out. If you are local and you want to be meeting with a group of Christians who are going to do everything we can to meet in person, we would love to have you. You're preaching Sunday morning?
I am.
On?
The sermon is called Being a Light in a Dark Place.
Being a Light in a Dark Place. I'll be preaching Sunday night at 5 o'clock from the prayer that the Christians offered in Acts chapter 4. I don't have a title for it.
It'll be Bible and it'll be good.
That's right. It'll be Bible and it'll be good. Thank you again. Thank you for Josh for coming in tonight and getting us online. We pray that you'll all be safe. God bless you.